everybody, and welcome to the EPL Falcon Banding. We have been doing this since 2004, and so we have been doing this for quite some time, and we will be doing it once again. You have been sending in your questions. We will be answering those questions as they come. And just to give you a little context, so on top of the Evanston Public Library are several pillars. And on the tops of these pillars are a pair of Peregrine falcons. Now, it hasn't been the exact same pair since 2004, but they have consistently nested on what I would consider to be the world's most perfect Peregrine falcon nest. They're just beautiful. Now, here is a little tip. If you like, you can open a second window to the Falcon Cam. So we have a live Falcon feed. If you Google Falcon Cam, usually actually it's the first one that comes up, or if you do Evanston Falcon Cam, have it up at the same time as this video, and then you will actually be able to see from two different angles, not just us doing the banding of the falcons themselves, but also you'll be able to see the falcons in the nest being taken, which hopefully won't get all that exciting. All right, so the very first thing to mention today is I am being joined by the Field Museum's director of the Chicago Peregrine program, Mary Hennen, seen here. I am also joined today by Mr. Josh Engel of Red Hill Birding. Seen here. You guys will be helping me out here today, right? So can you give a little rundown of what we're going to expect here?
Sure. Mary, do you want to do it?
Yeah.
All right, I'm doing it. We are banding the peregrine falcon chicks. So Betsy just gave a little introduction about the birds that have been here nesting on the library for quite some time, many years now. And what we're going to do is Mary has a long-term research project studying the peregrines and monitoring them ever since they were listed as an endangered species, both by the federal government and statewide in Illinois. They are no longer listed, but we're still keeping track of them and monitoring them to make sure that they're doing okay, to make sure that they don't need to ever get relisted as endangered. So one part of that project, that program, is to monitor the chicks and where they go and what they do. And one way that we do that is we take the chicks out of the nest for a few minutes. We put some jewelry on their legs that we call bands. The bands are individually marked so that we can read them later, or anyone can take pictures or see them through binoculars and read the letters and numbers and report them back to us, and we can keep track of the chicks that way. Where they're going, how long they're living, who they're mating with, if they're successful, and all those sorts of questions. So in a few minutes, we're going to go up to the nest. That's what you'll be able to watch on the Falcon Cam. If you pull that up in another window, we will. And yes, that's a good point. You should mute the Falcon Cam so that you're still listening to the Zoom program. So we're going to take the chicks, we're going to bring them back down into the library, we're going to put the bands on their legs, we're going to take a little bit of blood so that we can study their blood later. We archive the blood at the Field Museum, and then we will put them back, and they will go back about their business. So we're looking forward to this. Please ask us any questions in the chat.
Yes, so we will be monitoring the chat. We have not yet put the ladder up, so I guess we're going to be doing that about now. Mm-hmm. Yes, we're going to put the ladder up. We have one of the falcons, I believe that is Faye, glaring at us in a very threatening manner. She's now glaring at Todd, who is going to go out with the ladder. So I will show you guys some of what is happening with the ladder and things like that, but I also have some questions that you guys sent in early. Josh and Mary can be answering those as well. But for now, why don't you take a little peek at what's going on right over here. All right. So here's the ladder. And I don't know if you can hear her. She's been happier. Whoa. All right. All right, here's Mary getting suited up. So Mary, what is the likelihood of you getting injured by the falcon while you're doing this?
Well, the architecture of the building itself helps a lot to keep, acts as a barrier to the distance going toward us. Just in case she sneaks through, that's why you have the hard hat on and that. And what I'll do is I'll go up and make sure, sort of corral the little chicks away off so they're not close to the edge.
Mm-hmm.
Josh will bring me up the box. We'll put them in a little cardboard box and then we'll bring them in. So should go fine.
All righty. Watch what you do. And Josh, are you going up with her?
No, I'm just going to be at the bottom to hand her the box.
Got it. Now, what's Mary doing while she's still out
She's
there?
collecting some feathers.
Mm-hmm.
So Mary is up there collecting feathers so that we can see what they're eating.
Mm-hmm.
We can identify the birds that they've been eating from the feathers. I'm also going to go back out with the broom because the birds are being very aggressive. So I'm going to block the birds so that they just hit the bristles, the soft bristles of the broom while Mary's coming down, rather than hitting her bike helmet.
Okie dokie.
Oh, is there a... Can you hand me that Ziploc bag? Thank you.
Getting a bag for the feathers. So that's a bag of feathers?
A bag of feathers, a lot of pigeon feathers. I think most people know they eat a lot of pigeons. There's also, I don't know if you can quite see it, there's a blue feather right there.
Whoa, is that a blue jay?
That's a blue jay feather.
Ooh.
And we'll look through this later and see what else is in there.
Great, great.
There's.
Right. And then the falcons are in this box.
Move it up. Where's the camera?
A box of frozen meat rush delivery.
We also found a little fragment of an
Oh.
eggshell.
And do you test that to see how thick it is?
No, we won't. We're just showing it.
No, you're showing. Okay, great.
When there's still an unhatched egg, we do take that, and that can be tested for contaminants and that.
We will still keep the fragment for that same purposes. It would be archived in the Field Museum collection.
Should we close the window? Okay. So do you guys mind if I ask you some questions while you're setting up here?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
There's also a lot of questions.
Yeah, and there's a bunch of questions coming in. So I think the first thing we're going to be asking is, so does the banding hurt? You know, how worried should we be about these little guys?
Well, obviously, there's a little bit of stress to the adults. You could hear them yelling and being defensive. If there was any risk that the parents would not take them back, we wouldn't be going through this. But they will, and we can learn so much from having the bands on. And it's kind of like putting a bracelet on. They're sized exactly for these birds, so they're we don't have to worry about that the band is going to be too small. And if you notice, if you watch the webcam, the female is bigger than the male, right?
Why is
She's there's a lot of reasons for that. The male is a third smaller. He's not a third of the size, just a third smaller. And if you have different size in adults, they can catch a wider prey range. She's a bigger defender of the nest, so it's to her advantage to be big. She does most of the brooding of the chicks. So if you were watching the webcams and when the eggs first hatched, she's tucking them under the wings. Bigger she is, it's easier for her to fit the chicks under. So a lot of advantages that way. So anyway, we're trying to judge if the chick is a boy or a girl by looking at their leg size. If there's any doubt, you put the bigger female band on. Simple as that.
Yeah.
And that's what I was peeking in the box. It's just to
can we peek a little bit in the box here?
get a guesstimate on boy or girl.
Cool.
I think it's a girl yelling, and we'll start with
Okay.
this one.
Start with the noisy one, squeaky wheel. All right, so you guys gonna set up over here.
So I'm going to pull out.
So Mary's just taking some notes. The bands, like I said, the bands all have unique numbers on them, and that's how we keep track of them. So we need to make sure that the numbers, we write down the numbers to enter into a database later so that those numbers are associated with a specific bird. So Mary's just writing down the band numbers here. And the bands, the silver bands that you'll see in a little bit, those are from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So they're regulated by the government. The government actually sends them out. There you see a string of bands. And then we also have these, the bands with the numbers, letters, and colors. Those are the ones that can actually be read with cameras or binoculars or spotting scopes. And that's really the numbers that we use to track them. So this one, we would say it's black over blue, 98 over W. And that's how we will know that bird. But with the peregrines, we also give them names. And I think there's going to be
Oh yes, I have
a naming ceremony of sorts later.
For them, yes. And now I had a question that came in, and it asked, we noticed the remains of a banded bird's leg in the nest on Thursday. What was that bird? Pigeon.
It was a pigeon.
Yeah, typically if you see a banded bird in the nest, it's almost always going to be a pigeon, because people who keep pigeons ban them, and I think those ones are particularly vulnerable to peregrines, to becoming prey to peregrines, because they don't know very well how to evade predators like the pigeons that live here all the time do.
And someone else asked, do different kinds of falcons like each other, or do they eat each other?
Any peregrine or species of raptor or bird is going to be defensive of their nest against their own kind or other species. So right now, if a peregrine that didn't have a territory tried to come in and take over the site, well, then there would be a fight between those birds. That's usually when you're going to see a peregrine fighting another bird. There are species, maybe if we were at a cliff site, that would be more vulnerable to something like a great horned owl. I should say though, you know, this is nature, so keep that in mind. If there's a territorial fight between two birds and one of the adults dies, once it's dead, it's just a dead bird. So it could very easily be something that they would eat.
I've heard that they fight off red-tailed hawks from this site on this library.
Well, yeah, it's what are your resident raptors that are around here nesting. And again, while they're nesting, they're going to be very defensive. If we're talking the middle of winter, they would probably be more tolerant to a red tail in the area. Then you're talking about two species that are not really competing for the same prey base. Peregrines do all their hunting in flight. So what they're feeding on is predominantly birds. Something like a red-tailed hawk is going into the grass and grabbing something like a rabbit or mice or snake. And I know there was a question about, do peregrines eat the goslings from the geese? Some park is missing some or something. It's probably vulnerable to some other predator. Again, goslings can't fly yet, so it's not something that they're gonna get. All right, let's go for.
Loud.
I have to not fog up, so excuse me.
So that's the band?
This is the Fish and Wildlife Service band. So they're getting one for each leg. And the Fish and Wildlife Service one has 9 numbers that go all the way around the band, and kind of difficult to read unless you have the bird in your hand. And what the other band is just an extra marker, and it's easier to see through a spotting scope, you know, what the numbers are. Both are unique to the individual. So this will be the only one with that band combination on.
And why do you put it under the towel?
You notice how she quieted down a little bit?
Yeah.
It's kind of like, have you ever seen blinders on a horse? You know, so they don't get distracted by traffic and stuff off to the side. It's just a way to keep the bird a little calm.
And this will stay on them their entire life.
Yeah.
I'm getting ready to draw a little blood.
Why do you draw blood?
Or bloodborne parasites, diseases that way. We're not sure how it'll be used, because if we take it and store it, you have the ability to do that later. While you have them in the hand, try to study as much as you can, because you don't want to have to keep going after the birds to learn this. And it's just a pinprick worth of blood.
You haven't even gotten there yet. Let's see if they calm down.
And then I put the blood on this sort of this card that's been specially treated to preserve DNA.
Does each bird get one box?
Yeah.
Oh, neat. Each bird bird gets a box.
Yeah, so the question was, why do we take blood from the wing? It's because there's a nice big vein there, and they don't have very many feathers there yet. I'm not sure if people can hear me over the bird. Okay. They don't have very many feathers there yet, so it makes it easier to take blood from that.
So here's our first little girl.
That's a girl?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Oh, aren't you beautiful? All right. All right. So we have a name for this one.
Hold on a sec.
All right. Let's get her. All right. We have a name, and this is our first one. It's a girl. And so the name that was suggested. So we got a lot of suggestions that sort of pertaining to the times in which we live right now. And if 2020 teaches us anything, it's that sometimes the world changes in an instant, and then sometimes there are long-standing problems that don't seem to ever change until people come forward and demand change. And so we look forward. We want to have sort of a sense of hope for the future. The Spanish word for hope is Esperanza. And so we are naming this falcon our hope. Her name is Esperanza. Spell it. Esperanza. Esperanza. That is falcon number 1. How often do they eat?
That depends upon their size and their age. Obviously, if they're a little bird, you're feeding them a little bit at a time, so you're going to feed them more often during the day. When they get bigger and they can eat more at a sitting and handle that, then it's less frequent. You could say an adult peregrine can eat a pigeon-sized bird a day.
Wow.
I think that's a boy. I think this is another girl. Let's do this one. Let's pull another girl here.
Phone's right now. How soon will they leave the nest after this?
Not for about another 3 to 4 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Girls being bigger, tend to take a little longer to feather out.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but it's hit or miss. There's individual variation. They say somewhere around anywhere 40 to 45 days old. These are about 24, 25.
One question was, would the falcons usually prepare some kind of nest? At the library, they just sort of put the eggs right on the gravel without making a nest.
The mistaken impression is that when you say nest means they have to build a structure.
Mm-hmm.
Peregrines are nesting on a cliff ledge, and so what they do is whatever substrate, like rock and gravel is on it, they make a little depression, a little cup, and they call that a scrape. Mm-hmm. That's the peregrine's version of a nest. Mm-hmm.
How far do they fly from Evanston, do you know?
Again, there's individual variation in that. They generally wander in, the young ones after out of their nest wander somewhere around the Midwest, and then they'll go south for the winter. Mm-hmm. We've had birds show up in New York City. We've had them go as far south as Ecuador.
Oh, wow.
And then they're gonna come back somewhere in the Midwest, usually to breed. Now, males tend to not disperse as far from the natal nest as the females do. They seem to range out further. Mm-hmm.
Mary, what is the band made of? Is it aluminum?
Yes, bands they're made of aluminum. One is a fold-over band. Well, I can't show you. I got my. And this other one, this Midwest one, is a rivets. I wish they were all rivets. They're much easier.
What about our pair right now, Squawker and Faye? Do they leave during the winter or do they stick around?
No, our adults tend to stay year-round.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Their winter territories shift from where the, actually, they're both up on the beam right now. Slightly away from the breeding one, so they're not going to necessarily stay at the Evanston library, but they'll probably be somewhere in the neighborhood or nearby.
And they don't see this as a threatening place after we do the banding. They come back every single year.
No, if anything, once we put them back, they've been successful at driving that predator, being me, away on the younger five,
I see.
so they could be even more aggressive the next year.
There you go.
There's a lot of individual variation. This female, Faye, is more aggressive than Nona, the previous female was.
What took them off the endangered species list?
Population numbers coming back up. So when you didn't have any in the Midwest and the eastern part, they were bred in captivity and released in the wild through a process called hacking. And those original birds started using the cities. They're like the pseudo cliff, lots of prey, ample ledges. And when you had those birds out breeding and producing young, and that, it started the stock of what the wild population is now. All right. So here's our, our second girl.
Ah, second girl. All right. So. For name number two. Name number two. All right. So when it came to the pandemic, everybody had a lot of suggestions. I don't know about you guys, but so a lot of people suggested Corona, but the idea of having Corona flying over our heads didn't strike us as a great idea. We were like, nope, not gonna do that. Okay. But boy, people had lots of ideas. This pandemic has sort of caused us to rethink our skills and try new ones and maybe try new forms of communication. And so in the spirit of the times, and because we could not imagine any more name that was more perfect than this for a baby falcon, this little one is officially named Zoom. It's Zoom. It makes sense. So as long as she's not glitchy, she'll be fine. We're getting all slippery here. There we go.
We did you. Well, that's a boy. Question is she girl? Oh, let's go with the boy. Give me 1 sec, because I'm going to have to work that band a little bit. So.
How long are their talons?
I don't know. We got rulers. We can measure.
They're long enough and they're very, very sharp.
Very, very sharp.
That's why,
Even when they're
I wear work gloves when I handle it.
Even when they're little babies, they're very, very sharp.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's their defense. You saw the adults flying at us. Now, a chick can't do that. So what it does is flip on its back and it tries to hit you, trying to grab you with those feet.
What would try to eat them in the wild?
Great horned owl.
Ah.
Coons can get into nests and steal eggs and that. Josh answer another question. I mess around.
How fast can they dive on other birds when they're hunting them?
Very, very fast.
Very, very fast. Are they not the fastest?
They are considered not just the fastest bird, but the fastest animal on Earth.
Right.
You know, there's reports of them diving 200 something miles per hour.
Why are they so fast?
while their shape is super streamlined, they're totally built for speed. They have long wings and long tails and real strong flight muscles. I don't know why they can fly. I mean, there's other falcons that are pretty similar sized. I don't know why peregrines are able to fly faster than those other falcons, but
They're
they fly very fast,
nears in
especially
that.
in a stoop when they're diving down.
Yeah, they're adapted for being able to breathe at that speed too. If you look at a close-up picture of a peregrine's nose, you see a cone in the middle of it. And that cone forces, air hits it and forces it into the nose. Otherwise, at those speed, the air would be rushing over and it would essentially suffocate. So the cone in the middle, it hits that. And then there's little bones there that slow down the speed of that air coming in and make it easier for them to breathe. If you've ever traveled in an airplane, we're seeing the pictures of earlier jets and the engines with the cone and all the louvers. They mimicked them after peregrine falcons to how to get engineers on how to get planes to fly at those fast speeds.
Cool. Now we've heard of falconry. Does anyone ever try to tame a peregrine falcon?
Well, falconry doesn't necessarily mean taming it. That's something you should, I'm not a falconer. It's something you should Google, but it's the sport of hunting with falcons and that. It's very regulated, just like this is regulated. I have permits, state, federal, to be able to do that. They have permits on what they're allowed to have. You know, you go through being an apprentice to a general, to a master, and depending upon your experience and knowledge to define an area where you are, defines what species you might be able to have.
How does somebody who wanted to become a falconer procure a falcon?
Yeah.
Well, you're going to have to get that permit and go through a lot before you ever get to get a bird to begin with. And just go online and research like Great Lakes Falconers Association, and they would have individuals to contact in that. We're not falconers, so I don't want to speak.
So
On
there's breeders on sell falcons?
Well, that's a different issue. If you're getting a falcon that's bred in captivity and you imprint it on, that's never releasable in the wild. You have to already have your falconry permit and the facilities to house them and the permission to have that particular species. It's like I said, we'll table and do some research on Great Lakes Falconer Association. Just look up them.
Cool.
All right, let's go with the.
Yeah, that'd be great if we could just. Yeah. Cool.
You don't want to lay down, do you, buddy? Okay, that was bothering me. No, kind of thing.
He had a couple of feathers in his mouth, so Mary was
Pulling the feathers out.
pulling the feathers out.
That's the mom in me, you know, that slicks the hair back, and I don't have kids, so it comes out on animals.
So we'll just reserve the chat questions for the end when the
We
birds aren't being
could
quite so
always, after we're done, sit down
Yeah.
for a few minutes and
that'd be
talk.
great.
So.
Let's do that. that as touching bird. That's just touching the band. Ooh, better.
There's something I should have said when you were asking about where they go and that the first flight of a peregrine is usually a glide down to another level. And when you're in an area like this and it can mean the street, there's actually a wonderful group of people, the Evanston Falcon Watch, who take their vacation and time off to make sure when these young sleds that they end up somewhere safe or take care of it. Deborah Cohen is one of the people. So I would encourage you to also Google Evanston Falcon Watch if you're one of the residents around here and want to get active in helping watch the peregrines. Yeah.
How many falcons can they have at a time, like babies?
A typical collection is 3 to 4 eggs. We see up to 5. Okay. So anywhere in the 3 to 5 range is normal. This is a nice size brood. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, this time we have a little boy.
A little boy. All right, for our first boy, let's see here. Yeah, so this year we lost a towering figure in Evanston. Hecky Powell was more than just a businessman to the people of the city. He was a legend. He was a legend in his own right, and losing him in the midst of this pandemic was gutting. And so it seems fitting that we're going to name a falcon after the man who brought us more than just amazingly delicious barbecue. And so this falcon today is named Hecky in honor of the man himself.
That's wonderful.
Hecky. Hecky. Oh, you got a shot of the parents up here? Let's see here. I don't know if I can get them on the, where are they? There they are. There's mom and dad. Keeping an eye, making sure we're still here. They're there the whole time. And if you come into the library, you'll often see them up there. I consider this their television. They'll just sit in here and watch the people in the reference room like it's the most fascinating thing they ever saw. So if you ever want to see the falcons, this is a good place to go. 3rd floor of the library, when we're open.
Though when it gets near to 15,
That's true. And the birds.
on the way that they hear you.
Yeah. They'd say we just lost audio. I don't know. Yeah. You guys hear us? Can you wave if you can hear us? thank you. Taking yours. Okay. Whew. All right. Last one, number 4. Last one, number 4. Yeah. How often do you do this, Mary? Band falcons.
Well, every year, tends to be the time of year.
Mm-hmm.
So if we have access to the site, you know, not all nest sites are accessible like this.
Right, right. Just a quick note that Mary wrote a book on the subject. We have many copies in the library, The Peregrine Return. I had to put in a book plug there.
Yay. Yay for book club.
Lots of books in the library.
I have to write the band number for what is the next one? Second boy.
Second boy. This second, just cut out. Am I back on? I think we're back. Okay. Okay, good. All right, that was boy number 2. For boy number 2, well, we didn't just lose Hecky this year. I don't know how many of you knew Stan Azeem, who worked here at the library. His death hit us very, very hard. He was a security guard here at the library, but he was sincerely one of the best people I've ever met. As you know, he played a huge role in the library's push for equity in services and outreach to the community. After 2010, the Haiti earthquake, he helped get 3 ambulances down to Florida and then shipped them to Haiti. He started the organization JusBelieve, which is an after-school program that teaches kids about broadcasting. So in honor of Stan and his work and his life and everything he did for Evanston, we are naming this Falcon JusBelieve after the organization that meant so much to him.
JusBelieve.
Yes, it's just J-U-S and then believe. Yeah, capital B.
All right, now that they're all banded and everything, we want to get them back as quick as possible. So we're going to leave the mess on the table. We're going to do sort of the same thing we did when we grabbed them, but put them back. And then we'll come in and we'll be able to chat for a little more and answer a few more questions. Mary's got to take a photo.
Okay.
It's in the box.
They're so quiet. You sleeping?
No.
Oh. Yeah, that's a good idea. I should say what the 4 names are. So the 4 names are Esperanza, Zoom, Hecky, and JusBelieve. Mom and Dad are still watching.
They will stick in the air as soon as we go out.
Yes, they will. About how old are these birds?
About 24, 25 days.
Mm-hmm.
Take them so you can grab out without them.
you.
You want me to block? You want me to take the bait?
What's Mary doing?
She's coming down.
Uh-huh.
So she put the chicks back where they were.
Mm-hmm.
And now she's just climbing down the ladder.
Right.
And the parents are flying around screaming because we're still considered a threat. And it'll take them maybe half hour, 20 minutes to a half hour to calm down.
Mm-hmm.
They may even bring some food to the chicks in that period of time.
Mm-hmm.
You can keep watching the Falcon cam in one window and see what happens. They've just stopped calling, but maybe temporary. But the adults are diving at us. That's why we wear bike helmets. They always attack the adults attack the threat at the highest point. So we wear bike helmets because that's our highest point. But we also carry coats in case they get our arm. We try to wear sleeves all the time. And we carry the broom because we try to change the highest point from our head to the broom so that they actually strafe the broom, which is soft, it won't hurt them. And
That's very smart.
helps our heads stay safe too.
Clever. Well, should we pull up some chairs and have you guys answer some questions? Does that sound like a good plan? Sure, sure. All right, folks, we're going to answer your chat questions here. Just need to pull up a couple chairs and.
Right, chat with John. John's first thing. Or pull up here and I can chat with you.
Yeah, that's true. You can
I'm
pack
very
it.
particular. I want to put everything away, so I know where. So I don't let anybody help.
That's all right. Yeah, sure. Oh. Yeah, we got some chairs. Let me grab you. Oh yeah, why don't you do that right now?
Peggy, you want to come over? Do you have that book?
Yes.
Yeah, Betsy mentioned the book, but we have the artist here.
Oh,
This is Peggy McNamara.
beautiful.
Yeah,
So we've got 4 books with Field Museum scientists that, and hopefully Josh someday. So
someday.
migration, which is big in Evanston, and Illinois insects and nests. So
You can check that.
yeah, he did.
Yeah, so Peggy illustrated the Peregrine returns. And when the book came out, there was actually an exhibit of the art in the Field Museum, but that has since been taken down. And the book
To which
came out
some is in my home.
Ooh, yeah, lucky. That's awesome.
It was the one year there was no babies.
just
Oh yeah.
So we came
I remember
here,
that year.
Yeah,
That
'cause
was
it
not
was
that
like
long
2
ago, yeah.
years ago.
Oh,
Yeah, so it's
That was a
great
very
to
sad
see
year.
4 chicks.
That was Faye's first year. Yeah, he was a little new at it.
Well, she was an experienced breeder. Very young birds, have smaller size clutches, and then obviously as they get to be old birds, they can lessen in size. The Squawker is getting up there in age. He's
Yeah,
17 now.
How old do they get?
Well, they can go up to 20 in captivity, low 20s.
And they can breed that entire time.
Well, they can go through the motions.
Yeah.
Like at our UIC site, we had a female when she was 18, 19. She was paired with her mate and they were holding the territory, but she didn't lay any eggs. She probably just used up the quantity of eggs that she had in her or whatever, or,
Yeah.
You could go through the motions as a very young bird, but copulation might not be successful, which means the eggs don't get fertilized. And so then they sit on eggs that never hatch.
Oh, okay.
So a lot of variance.
Okay, so Josh, this question comes from Alice. Do you clean the nest after this year's litter has fledged?
So we got a question if we clean the nests every year after the young have gone. The simple answer is no. But after many years, the nests can get really messy. So there's some nests where we actually contribute gravel to help provide a substrate for them to nest on. The gravel's great because it drains well and it's good for putting their eggs on. So there are some times where we will go out after a season and replace the gravel, but typically we do not clean the nests out pretty much ever.
How can you tell the mom from the dad?
So the next question is, how do we tell the mother from the father, the male from the female?
We're doing that by size. In birds of prey, females are larger than males. We talked about that earlier. A male peregrine is called a tiercel, and that just means a third. He's a third a third smaller than the female would be.
And that's the case for pretty much across the board. Owls, falcons, hawks, eagles, females are bigger than the males.
We can also, because we've identified them, if you can read, oops, I went right through the baggie. Read the bands, you tell them apart by the bands that we're putting on. The same thing, the reason why we banded the young today. And we know this female is unbanded and the male is banded. So in that case, I don't even have to read the bands to tell them apart. I just go, oh, look, you know. Because size can sometimes be hard to tell. It's easy if they're sitting next to each other, you got a tiny little, and the other one's big. But if they're in flight or perched somewhere by themselves, it's harder to tell.
The first year mortality is 70 to 75%. Is that consistent with the EPL birds?
So the question is about the mortality rate of young birds. Mortality rate is very high in all birds, probably all animals in the first year of life. So the question is, the mortality rate is reported to be about 50 to 75% in the first year. Is that consistent with what we found with the birds here on the Evanston Public Library? Mary maybe knows.
You know, in general, it's somewhat hard to tell because a lot of them we just never hear again. So we want to go with the assumption that they're fine. But in the long run, yes, it likely sticks with that ratio.
Yeah, it's probably about right. Do you know where some Evanston birds have gone?
We do if I open up my computer.
Yeah.
I don't remember. We've had sightings of our birds, and I know one had bred in Indiana, another one, it was either in Minnesota or Wisconsin. I looked at it last night, and I've already forgotten. But the majority we haven't heard from.
When feeding is done, Thayer's Walker removes the remains from the screen. Any idea where these are deposited?
So the question is, when the adults are done feeding the chicks with some prey, say they take a pigeon to the nest, they feed it to the chicks, but of course there's some bits and pieces remaining, they remove that. And the question is, what do they do with it? Where do they deposit it?
Oh, God.
Probably if you walk around a few blocks around the library, you'll find some bird parts.
Dropped off the side.
But there's not one, I don't think there's one depository that they always go to.
Peregrines are neat in that they will cache food. So the male will hunt extra, and caching just means leaving it on another building ledge or corner or top. You think, oh, well, why did it leave it up here? That was a silly place to drop it. It was just a place where it's storing it. So maybe they return that piece to where they cache it because they can go back for the little meat that's left on later.
Yeah, and here's a crazy falcon story. There's another kind of falcon that, like peregrines, traditionally nests on cliff faces. There's some indications that this kind of falcon, it's called an Eleanor's falcon, will cache prey live. They have a way of sort of sticking live prey into a rock crevice that they can't get out of so that it stays fresh.
Well, isn't it because they nest on a place where their main food source is during migration, and so they have to rely on the birds passing through, and if you're going to have young later or whatever, you know,
yeah, you
gotta store some.
Squawker is pretty old. How many years?
The question is, Squawker's old. How many more years may he be here?
Probably 2 at the most. So I'm always pleasantly surprised when he's here. It doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, say he's not going to survive it at 18, but it's that a younger male can come and, you know, is more fit and can take over the territory. So we often see one of the older birds be replaced, and we know that bird isn't dead because it's hanging out in the area. It's just not able to hold the territory.
Do they eat chickens, banded chickens? Is that something that might be in their diet? Somebody took a photo of
The question is, do they eat chickens? And people who keep chickens maybe put bands on their legs to keep them straight or know whose is whose. So do they ever eat chickens?
Well, we don't really have chickens here that would, if you go into the quail family that chickens are related to, grouse and that type of game birds, could they feed on those? Yeah, sure. Your domestic chicken like at your stores is really not going to be out flying in the area where any of our peregrines are going to get.
No, but people have chicken coops.
Oh, well, they're not going to go into a coop necessarily because they want their bird in flight. There are other raptors around like a Cooper's hawk that get mistaken for a peregrine a lot. They're roughly the same size, again, very streamlined. They're more apt to be zipping through the trees and getting the birds at your feeder or coop. You know, just most chicken farmers, you know, do the preventative measures in the way that they're housed in the caging and maybe a fake owl or something up to try to deter a raptor from being in the area.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever found a chicken feather in a
They do ducks
peregrine
though, right?
nest. Yeah, they'll eat
Well,
ducks.
yeah,
Mhm.
they used to be called the duck hawk, so a duck would be a normal size prey for them to catch.
Under normal circumstances, would you wear a mask while banding to protect the birds from infection?
The question was, under normal circumstances, would we be wearing masks while we banded the birds? And the answer is no.
No.
And given the high mortality rate, is this process of banding them so stressful that it can affect the chances of
The question is, given the high mortality rate of young birds, does banding them, the stress from banding them, increase that mortality? And the answer is, as far as we know, no.
No.
That's been studied quite a bit in peregrines and in many other birds. And for the most part, the answer is no.
Again, if that was something they were finding early on, we wouldn't have been going through this exercise all these years. Same thing like if the parents didn't accept them back. What we want is they have a wild population outbreeding successfully. Banding in a way is a luxury. It allows the scientists to learn a lot about them. But if it was harming them in any way, we wouldn't be doing it.
what are some of the resident raptors in Evanston?
The question is, what are some other resident raptors in Evanston? The most common one that you would expect to see in your backyards is the one that Mary mentioned. That's Cooper's hawk. They've expanded their distribution and they've become very common around Evanston in the last few decades. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is maybe the trees have gotten bigger, so it's a little bit more forest-like. Cooper's hawks are in a group of hawks called accipiters. They have short wings and long tails for maneuvering through forests. But Evanston is forest-like enough, rather, that we have a lot of Cooper's hawks here. They also eat a lot of birds around bird feeders. So you're doing a great service to the little birds by feeding them seeds, but you're also helping Cooper's hawks find prey as well. We also have another kind of falcon around here, a very small falcon called an American Kestrel. They like more open areas. You find them sometimes along the metro tracks or a place like James Park or the lakefront where the habitat is a little bit more open. Those are primarily mammal eating. They mostly eat mice, but they'll eat birds too. And then the last one I'll mention is red-tailed hawk, which is the biggest hawk that we have, which is you find in also like kestrels in more open places. They may nest along the canal somewhere. Certainly if you're driving anywhere along an interstate or a highway and you see a hawk sitting up on a pole, that's almost certainly a red-tailed hawk. But there's other ones too that I haven't mentioned.
Look for a nice big belly band. And along the lines of plugging things, we plugged my book earlier. I'm going to plug Josh. Josh runs a tour guide. It's Red Hill Birding. You'd want to look at it. So in the fall migration, you want to see hawks coming through, or any time of the year. He'll do local tours as well. Just contact Josh.
When somebody sees a falcon with a band, how is that data captured? Where is it recorded?
So it was, if somebody sees a falcon with a band, where is the data recorded? I'd love you to, if people could snap a picture. We really need to be able to read the numbers and letters in that band to know who the individual is. I put all the information into it's Midwest Peregrine Society. It's an online database that sometime later you can go in and you could plug in those names like Hecky. And it would give you the records of when it was banding and the date and whatnot. And then there's a little box that would have information on any subsequent sightings or where it bred, that sort of thing. Don't look now, don't go to now, because it's going to take me a while to get in the database. And it's usually, peregrines typically start breeding at years old. Now that the population is up, it's generally 3 or 4 before they can take over territory. But that would be the place to look for that information.
And then, do their legs get wider as they grow, and do the bands seem to grow?
They're asking about the question was about if the leg keeps growing and we have to worry about the width of the band constricting them. No, that's why we're doing them at their age. We're doing them in the 21 to 24 days old. They're physically as big as they're going to get. They just don't have those flight feathers yet. You saw them, just the little brown was the feather starting to emerge. So I don't worry that way. If there's any doubt, what I would do would be put a female band on, because that's the larger of the band. So if I look at it and I think it's male, but there's some question, the leg looks a little soft, you just go with the larger band.
When is it likely they will learn to fly?
The question is, when do they learn to fly? Well, in about 3 weeks or so, they'll be taking their first flight, but using the word flight is very generous because it's really just a glide down to another level. It takes about first 3 weeks of being out of the nest, you know, they gradually get more experience. If you see a young sitting on a ledge and it's yelling, it might not be that after it's fledged somewhere, it might not mean that it's hurt. What the parents will do is, instead of going to it and feeding where it is, they'll fly by with the food and go land somewhere else. The sort of enticement is that, you know, you fly to me to get it. So about first 3 weeks learning how to fly well. And once they start doing that, parents feed them a little less, and they're hunting on their own. And by 4 or 5, 6 weeks, they're gone from here, gone independent of the adults.
And Josh, when you're using the needle, is that a blood sample or a vaccination that you're giving the birds?
The question is, when I'm doing the blood with the needle, what am I doing? And I'm drawing blood. So I'm just taking a little drop of blood and I put it on the specially treated paper that preserves DNA so that can be archived at the Field Museum as all specimens are archived there, and we can, or any researcher can then use that to study peregrine falcons later. So it's just a little bit of a blood draw, no vaccination. I'm not injecting anything. It's just a simple blood draw, like when you go to the doctor.
If when we grab the birds and are looking at them and have them in hand, see anything wrong, then what we would do would take them to a wildlife rehab center and make sure they're fine, because we would have time to take care of them and then put them back in the nest. Or if need be, they would stay in rehab until they're ready to be released.
And barring an unforeseen event, is this the only interaction you'll have with the birds?
The question was, barring an unforeseen event, is this the only interaction we have with the birds? Pretty much, until hopefully they get a territory and they start breeding, and then we have the same interaction, but in this case, in that case, they would be the adults.
And there are other nests where we don't have a webcam. The webcam is super helpful because we can monitor and see when they lay eggs, when the eggs hatch, how the young are doing. Other nests where we don't have a webcam, we may go up once or twice before banding so that we know exactly when we should be going to do the banding, just to get the timing right.
Okay. Why aren't you wearing gloves? Wouldn't gloves help protect the bird?
Pretty much diseases between, if you're worried about them catching the same thing, the body temperature of birds is so much higher than adults. There's not a lot of transference that way. You saw us wearing gloves earlier, grabbing them in and out of the box or out of the nest. That's mostly to protect our hands from their talons versus us being worried about something transferable. Of course, we have hand sanitizer here that we'll use before we go out and after, just as a precaution, more of our health to each other than from the bird to us.
And I put a little alcohol on the wing before I draw the blood too, you know, like you would get a swab, same as if you were going to the doctor.
You have an answer, I think, for male versus female. Yeah. Okay, and then is 4 chicks a large family or typical?
4 chicks, the question was on the size of the brood. It's a good sized brood. 3 to 4 is typical, yeah. But still, 4 is very nice.
And do they usually lay that many eggs?
Yeah, it's always on average. It's 3 to 5. We've seen one where they've laid 2. We've seen them, again, it tends to be if it's a very young bird or a very older bird, clutch sizes tend to be smaller. And when they're right in the prime, you're going to get to the 3 or 4. We've seen them as much as 5.
And do mating pairs stay together? season?
The question is, do mated peregrine falcon pairs stay together all year, or between, after the breeding season? And the answer is, some do,
Some do.
some don't. Peregrines are really an interesting bird. Their native range, peregrines live almost all over the world. And a lot of the peregrine falcons in North America are strongly migratory. Like they might breed in Canada and spend the winter in South America. For the most part, the birds that breed around here don't go that far, but sometimes they do. And probably the ones that migrate split up, but some of the pairs that stick around the local area here would more likely to be in pairs.
Again, we tend to see a little bit of a shift away from that building that they bred on, maybe more toward the lakefront and more open area. They're going to be where the winter prey predominantly is.
How many chicks have hatched total as long as you've been doing this? And do you know how many have survived for all the years?
If I opened up, and the question was, how many chicks have we had in total off this building? Oh, I just sent you that recently. Hold that question. I think I took a bit, Josh and I
That's
were
right.
recently talking about it, and I went, and what I have to do is go through the years and count, and I did count up to,
Somebody says it's a 17th consecutive nest here at the library.
17th consecutive nest here. That sounds about right. Before they nested on the library, they nested on another building, a church building right nearby. But once they found the library, they liked it and they stuck here. So
this is not counting this year.
number of eggs, 62. 53 of those eggs hatched, which is a pretty high percentage. And out of the 53 that hatched, 45 fledged. So there have been 45 fledged birds from the library here. We don't really know exactly how many survived to be 1, 2, 3 years old.
Though we just counted, there was 1 or 2 instances where one in their first flight didn't survive. So that's not counted as a fledged bird.
And can the birds understand each other by their squawks, the falcons?
The question is, can the birds understand each other by their squawks? That's a largely unknown question. Probably, they're communicating, right? So
Yeah.
they must be communicating something. I would suspect that they can understand the general meaning of what's being said, so to speak.
They would know what an alarm call is. It doesn't necessarily mean that I know Josh is making that sound versus, his sibling sound versus I hear an alarm, or
Yeah,
I hear a begging call or I hear a courtship call.
Yeah, that's a question that across all birds still needs to be studied more. It's something that's very difficult to study and there's not a lot known about it, but that's a very good question.
And then why does only one pair of falcons breed here when there's other window bays that could be used as scrapes?
So the question is, why do they only nest here when there's lots of good window wells, window bays, appropriate habitat, so to speak, all around here?
We've seen, and it has to do with their territorial size, and it's up to them to figure out how close they'll tolerate another pair. Back when we didn't really have any pairs in the state, and our first ones that came in,
That would be about 30 years ago.
Yeah, we're talking about 89, 90, about when I started with the program and this. We had pairs that were holding 5 miles as a territory. And I know it was the same individual, again, from the band, being able to verify he's on this building and they're way over there. And as the population has gone out, we've seen that sort of shrink in size. Now we have them as close as literally being across the street, but when you have pairs nesting together, they tend to be, if Josh was one, he'd be holding the territory to his right. And if I'm nesting, I'm holding it to my left, and we're just seeing them close on the edges of their territory. So it's roughly within a half mile or so is the size we're seeing now. They generally would not tolerate another pair that would be way too close on the same structure.
How big are their wingspans?
What is the wingspan of a peregrine falcon?
I don't know. I'm looking at you.
We should know that.
Yay.
Somewhere between 3 and 4 feet, I would guess.
Yeah.
Something like that. Long enough. They're pretty long-winged birds, which is typical of birds that spend a lot of time flying in open habitats. Helps them maneuver very quickly through the air. I don't actually know the exact measurement. You could probably look that up via Google better than what I know, but their whole shape is streamlined for flying really fast in open habitats to catch prey that's flying and also to migrate long distances.
All right, we should, the parents can still see us. They're up there watching, they're not yelling, but we do want to give them a chance to calm down and everything. So let's take one last question, two at the most, and then we're going to wrap up. Is there a way we can grab Betsy in here? If you have questions later, you could always go to one of our websites and find our contact information and email us that way.
People want to know how they can get your hat and if you're doing tours this fall.
Where's your hat?
People are asking about my hat. This is my,
I want a hat too. I've been asking for years.
you'd have to contact me. You can contact me via my website, redhillbirding.com, to get hats. I'll be doing some local trips this fall. I'm going to do some local trips for small groups coming up in the next month or so to look for breeding birds. You can sign up for those are not on my website yet, but you can sign up for my email list via my website, and I'll be sending out an email about those trips coming up early next week.
There's a newsletter, don't you put a newsletter?
Yeah, so
out?
that'll be in the newsletter that's coming out next week. Some morning long trips to see some of the local birds around the Chicago area, Northwest Indiana, over the coming month. And hopefully, you know, obviously tourism is, I run birding tours all over the world, and tourism is down tremendously. You can't really go anywhere now. So I'm hoping to be able to pick up tours again in the fall, but I don't know for sure, but I'll at least be doing local trips around here.
Then to sign off, what are the names of the chicks again? Could you repeat the names of the chicks?
Well, yes, we need to.
Betsy can do that.
And also the book about falcons and names of the books.
Oh yeah, so people want a repeat of the name of this book. This is called The Peregrine Returns. It's written by Mary Hennen, illustrated by Peggy McNamara. It should be available via local booksellers, online, and of course you can check it out from the library here as well.
And yes, just to recall what the names of the 4 falcons are, the first one was a female, she was Esperanza. The second one was a female, her name is Zoom. The third one was a male, his name is Hecky. And the fourth one was a male, and his name is JusBelieve.
All right, well, thank everybody for coming and watching, and hopefully next year, because they seem to nest here every year and the library invites every year, it'll be another year where people can come in close.
And thanks to Betsy for organizing this.
Thanks, Betsy.
And thank you guys for coming in.
People want to know where they can watch this.
All right, so I have been informed that I can turn this into a file and we'll put it up on YouTube. Give me a couple days and I will try. I cannot absolutely guarantee it because technically I am not the best, but I will give it a good shot. And if it is up, we will put it on the EPL YouTube page. You just go to YouTube and you put Evanston Public Library and you can find our YouTube page there, which has lovely tutorials on all our different databases. If you would like books about falcons right now, you can actually go to Hoopla and you can put in falcons and you will find a huge range of books for both kids and adults all about peregrine falcons. So please think about doing that. Thank you both guys for coming here. Should we do a parting shot of our parents here so people can see them? So you guys can see,
sitting up there.
they've just been staring and glaring at us the whole time, and we figured you guys should get a good, let's see if I can get high enough here. Where they are. There's our parents, suspicious of us. All right. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great day. Bye-bye.